And my name is Joe Barton. I'm one of the trustees for the Ross Historical Society and Moya Library. We still have a few people joining us, so we'll just give it a couple more seconds. And well, why don't we go ahead and get started? It's 11 o'clock. Once again, my name is Joe Barton. I am a trustee for the Ross Historical Society and Moya Library. I'd like to welcome all of you to our first Friday presentation today. Before I hand it over to our guest speaker and Richard Turney, I want to just mention that this is a webinar, and many of you are probably familiar with how a webinar works. You can see us, but we can't see you. You're welcome to ask questions through the chat or the Q&A feature, or you can raise your hand if you'd like. I think Gray will be taking questions at certain points during the presentation, but feel free to post your questions whenever you'd like. And then if you have any other questions, then just use the Q&A or the chat, and that's about it. I think what I'll do now is I'll hand it over to Richard Turney, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Joe, and thank all of you for joining this morning as we conclude our 50th season of First Friday Forenoon programs. It has been an unusual year with 3 of our programs canceled due to COVID-19 and the final 2 programs presented in Zoom. We do plan to schedule a new season in 2021, but are not sure what format will be used, whether it's live events at the Art and Garden Center or Zoom. The 3 guest speakers that were canceled from this year's season said that they would be willing to reschedule. So we expect to have Peter Pike talk about remarkable stories about his ancestors' journeys to California. And then local author Julia Flynn Seiler will discuss her recently published book, The White Devil's Daughters, the Women Who Fought Slavery in San Francisco's Chinatown. And we also, in 2020, our nation celebrated the 400th anniversary of Mayflower's arrival to New England. So 1 year late, Mayflower Society member Mary Ames Mitchell will reveal little-known stories and trivia about the ship's voyage and the 102 passengers she carried. Now, dates have not been selected for anything next year, and I'm sure we'll be adding more speakers. We would encourage you to join our group so that you will be informed as soon as the schedule is confirmed. Now, like many other historical groups, this year has been difficult for us, and we would appreciate any donations that you'd be willing to make. So please go to our website for membership and donation information. I'm honored today to present our speaker. Dr. Gray Brechin is the author of Farewell Promised Land, Waking from the California Dream, and also the best-selling Imperial San Francisco, Urban Power, Earthly Ruin. The latter a study of environmental devastation wrought via remote control technology by legendary cities throughout history for the benefit of their ruling elites. He is especially interested in the role of mining in imperial city building. Formerly a journalist and TV producer in San Francisco, Dr. Brechin received his doctorate in 1998 from the UC Berkeley Department of Geography, where he is currently the project scholar and founder of the Living New Deal. While revealing the enduring but largely invisible contributions made by FDR's construction agencies, the Living New Deal simultaneously discloses the essential role played by the public domain in a healthy democracy. So please welcome Dr. Gray Brechin.
Gray, you want to unmute yourself. Gray, you need to unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
Okay.
There you go. You sound good now.
Good. Okay. Sorry about that. This is my maiden Zoom presentation. So this is kind of exciting because I hope to do a lot more of these. So barring technical glitches, this should be fun. Thanks very much for having me. I want to say hi to all of my friends out there, including John up in Cambridge and Laura in Vienna. Thanks all for coming. And it's just always great to have a chance to proselytize about the project that I've been working on now for about 15 years. And this one is specifically about Marin and Sonoma counties, but I'm going to spend the first part of it talking about just sort of introducing you to the New Deal, because a lot of people don't even know that it ever happened, or they just know it as a term, but it's a fairly complex thing. And then we'll go on to all of the things in Marin and Sonoma County that you see and use practically every day and don't know where they came from and the debt that you owe to those people who built them. Well, I like to say that we should actually learn from the last Great Depression. And these are photographs from that one. They're the FSA photographs.
Oh, great. I'm sorry, let me interrupt you for a second. You're sharing your screen, but we're seeing your just you. So you're sharing your video screen. You want to click to your program.
I'm sorry, Joe?
Can you want to go to you want to screen share the program slides that you've prepared. Right now, we don't see that. We just see you. So why don't you go to, oh, we are seeing the program slides. Okay, I'm not seeing them for some reason.
Okay.
All right. And I stand corrected. If everybody can see them, then just go right ahead.
Okay. So you can see that now.
It appears so, yeah.
Okay, that was that was a glitch I was anticipating. So here we go once more. Oh, and I want to contradict something I think Joe said. Save your question till the end, please, because I've got a lot to go through, and then I can answer those questions at the end. So as I said, we can learn a lot from the last Great Depression. These are photographs taken by Dorothea Lange of that time. But in a way, they look very familiar to us if you just walk around our streets today, because we have thousands of people who are now living in their own personal Great Depression. And this affects not only them, but business and quality of life, et cetera. So I want to think about how the New Deal, the Franklin Roosevelt administration, would have handled this problem 80 years ago. It would have done so far differently than we're dealing with it now. At the beginning of the Great Depression, people were really angry. They had been in a depression that had been lurching downwards for over 4 years when Roosevelt was inaugurated in 1933. And I think that this fresco in Coit Tower sort of conveys the anger that so many men in particular felt when they were thrown out of work. And that was something that Roosevelt knew that he had to deal with, or there would be another a civil war or a revolution. So he felt that he had to do something to subvert that. But fortunately, at that time, we had a president who actually spoke English, and he did so beautifully. He spoke against fear itself rather than cultivating it, and he knew how to use the mass media to unite rather than inflame the country. And so I think of him as the great communicator of that time. He had a beautiful speaking voice. If you want to hear him give his fireside chats, you can go to YouTube and you can hear them. They're absolutely magnificent. in which he would be explaining to the nation what was going wrong with the economy at that time and what his administration planned to do to rectify that. That was very, very different than, as you might imply, the way that we're dealing with things now. So here you had both of the Roosevelts. We got a twofer at that time with Eleanor as well too. And some of the people in the Roosevelt administration, whom I'll be coming back to in a while. This is an excerpt from Roosevelt's second inaugural address. It's on the Roosevelt Memorial, which is on the tidal basin in Washington, D.C., which is, I think, is Larry Halpern's masterpiece. And Halpern, of course, was a Marin boy, and he did this beautiful memorial to Roosevelt, whom he admired so much. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. Well, that is a fundamentally Christian statement. And the point I wanted to make is that many of the people with whom both of the Roosevelts surrounded themselves were practicing rather than professing Christians. They walked the walk, and they felt that it was their duty to help those less fortunate than themselves. Here we have him. This is the other fellow. And this was 2008, just as the Great Recession was beginning. And he ran these full-page advertisements in papers around the country, this happened to be the Chronicle, about how you could profit from your neighbor's misfortunes and become wealthy in the process. Well, as I said, there were really remarkable people orbiting around both of the Roosevelts. One of them is right here, Francis Perkins, kind of intellectual and compassionate master gear of the Great Depression. She's the mother of Social Security, which so many of us, of course, rely on these days. But there were many others as well, too. This is a conference that we at the Living New Deal held in Berkeley just 2 years ago about what the New Deal did for and by women. It's a remarkable cast of characters. One of the things we also do with the Living New Deal is to produce hard copy maps of New Deal contributions to various cities. Our first one was San Francisco, but then we did New York City just 2 years ago. There are hundreds of points, we're still discovering them. And the one we're about to release is New Deal Washington, DC. This is just a preview of what will soon be hard copy. Well, as we've been digging up the lost world of the New Deal, it's been like an archaeological dig. It's one that my parents built, but they forgot to tell me about. And there are reasons for that, actually, but it's a very exciting archaeological dig because we keep discovering so much, and so much of it is so beautiful as well as indispensable. It actually began as a book about 15 years ago that I was going to do about what the WPA had done just in California. But very quickly I found that there were other agencies and there was so much that it couldn't possibly be contained between the covers of a book because we kept discovering stuff. So this is the beta version of the Living New Deal as we began to cover California. That was San Francisco. We began to find so much, we decided to go national. And this is what happened as the site grew. You can see it's getting a little cluttered. And the point is that the entire nation was transformed in just 8 years of the New Deal, of the Franklin Roosevelt administration. So then we had to tidy things up. So we've gone to this one. This is our current map, but you can zoom in. Here's the Bay Area. Each one of those color-coded dots represents a New Deal site. And you just click on them when you're on the site, and then information will come up, often photographs. We're always looking for more photographs, and I'm going to deal with that. But you can see that there are a lot in San Francisco and the East Bay, but what's going on in the North counties? We want to know, and if you know of anything New Dealish up here in the North counties, let us know, and we'll log it in, we'll check it out and log it in to the site. Now, I first have to also tell you about a few of the agencies, because this is part of the very confusing alphabet soup agencies that left us stuff. The first was the Civil Works Administration, the CWA, which most people have never heard of. It was a short-lived emergency work relief operation, which Roosevelt began by executive order in the winter of 1933 to get Americans through the very harsh winter that year without starving and freezing. He put Harry Hopkins in charge of it. We'll come back to him in a moment. And within 1 month, Hopkins had created 2 million jobs. And within 2 months, he'd created 4 million jobs for Americans. And they did everything from feeding children to sewing clothes. They were paid directly by the federal government. You might see at the top that it says the 4 million. That means the 4 million jobs. That would be as if when this guy came in during the Great Recession, he had, within a very short period of time, created 14 million jobs in 2 months. So just try to imagine that. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. There are CWA projects around, but they're generally not labeled. This is an amphitheater in a park in North Berkeley made with recycled smashed concrete. And then this is a tennis court in North Berkeley, and it's one of the few sites that I've seen that actually has a CWA marker on it. That's because the workers who built it wanted to be remembered, and so they paid from their meager salaries to have a local tombstone carver carve these 2 stones, 1934 and the CWA. The CWA also had an art project right from the very get-go. Hopkins knew that artists were the first to starve, and he put them to work. And San Francisco has the first large CWA art project, Coit Tower. You've probably seen it. Most people think it's WPA. No, the WPA came along in 35. This is actually 33 to 34. And the murals are absolutely fascinating. I never get tired of looking at them. These are true frescoes, actually, but it's not often the kind of thing that the Chamber of Commerce wanted people to see or think San Francisco was like, at least for the leftiest of these murals, like those by Bernard Zackheim here in this library, where somebody is grabbing a copy of Karl Marx off of the shelf. This got these guys into big trouble and resulted in the tower being actually closed for a few months while some of the artwork was tidied up. Now, here are 2 of the master administrators. Harry Hopkins on the left was in charge of the CWA, the FERA, and the WPA. On the right, Harold Ickes was Secretary of the Interior, but also in charge of the Public Works Administration. These guys often wouldn't be talking to each other, but their agencies would often work together, although there was a certain rivalry between them. I think neither of these guys ever slept. Hopkins seems to have lived almost entirely on cigarettes and coffee. These are WPA posters. And the point here is that the work that they created for people who were on the relief rolls at that time to give them jobs was socially beneficial work, not the kind of work that the major corporations actually could or wanted to create. These were socially beneficial projects. This is actually a bas-relief at the New Deal, new town of Greenbelt outside of Washington, D.C., in which a woman sculptor, Lenore Thomas, sculpted the preamble to the US Constitution. It's to remind us that one of the clauses of the preamble is promote the general welfare. And that's what these projects did. It was for the general welfare. They believed that it was better and certainly a lot cheaper to address these problems at their root rather than let them get out of hand as we have. Another one of the agencies was the Civilian Conservation Corps. This was Roosevelt's own idea. It was one of the first to be formed. It was an army, a peacetime army of over 3 million young men, many of whom had been starving, were illiterate, etc. They were put to work in camps around the country to take care of our forests and rural lands, and at the same time to redeem themselves of their dire straits at that time. Eleanor Roosevelt said that she often would be kept up at night thinking that we were losing an entire generation of young people. So the thing to do was to give them useful and productive work, and boy, did they do it. These are some of the photographs of CCC boys hard at work, improving our national and state and parks, our forests, etc. They were in thousands of camps around the country, each one holding about 200 men, with an infirmary, a library, recreational facilities, and they worked hard. They were also given education and training. The WPA provided that. This is extension, which would send out materials to all the CCC camps, but there would often be local teachers as well to give these young men training. As I say, they took care of our forests. Here they are cutting down diseased trees. We need something like this today. They fought forest fires, as need to say more. This is very personal for me because I live in Inverness, and our forests over there, as all around the California and the West, are in a terrible state. Much as I hate to agree with our president on anything, the forests are in terrible shape. There's an enormous fuel load because we haven't been maintaining them as they were at that time. But that has a lot to do with tax cutbacks, which makes it impossible to do so. So in Inverness, we're sitting on a powder keg of fuel in the forests around us. And what we really need to do, what I worry about is that we're going to have a repetition, especially on Mount Tamalpais, of the Great Mill Valley Fire of 1929. Of course, this is already happening all over the West as entire towns are being incinerated. This was an op-ed that I did for the Point Reyes Light 3 years ago about the need to revive the CCC. But that's probably not going to happen on the federal level anytime soon. So in lieu of that, I'm recommending that we increase what we already have, that we vastly expand the California Conservation Corps, which Jerry Brown I actually modeled after the original CCC, about which he knew a lot. And we need to expand that so that we can begin building fuel breaks around and in towns like Inverness, but many others throughout the West. The CCC boys also left a heritage of beautiful stonework. This is actually in the Hudson River Valley. This is a ranger station in Salem, Oregon. And just look at the quality of that stonework. The men would often come back later on in their lives, in their 80s or 90s, to show their families what they did at that time. Incredibly proud of it. Many of the CCC boys said that was the best time of their lives and set them up for success later on. Well, let's get to Marin County at last. Muir Woods just filled with CCC stuff. There were several CCC camps on Mount Tamalpais. One of them worked in Muir Woods. Here they are laying stone revetment in the creek. I was part of a crew later on, about 20 years ago, actually removing those stones because they were well-intentioned, but in fact, it actually hindered the migration of the salmon, we now know. And so we took it out at the direction of the rangers there. They created many of the trails that you use on Mount Tamalpais. They built the fire lookout on top of the mountain. And they created this extraordinary structure, the Mountain Theater, which so many of you have enjoyed. It seats 6,000. It was one of many amphitheaters built around the country. And these were done very deliberately to bring Americans together, but also in reference to the great theaters that the Greeks had built as the root of democracy itself. But this is one of my favorites. There are many of them around the country. Another masterpiece actually is Red Rock Amphitheater, built by the CCC in the Front Range west of Denver, if any of you have ever been there. This was a CCC hut. It's called the Three Bear Hut, which is in Ross. It was actually originally on water land, but then it was donated to the city of Ross and recently went through a beautiful restoration. It's just an inspiration to see it. I wish we could do this with many of our CCC structures, so many of which are composting now. Oh, there's the revetment in that creek, and that's all CCC work. This is actually in Santa P. Taylor. It's called the Diablo Stove. They were originated on Mount Diablo State Park. And when you see one of those, you know that the CCC was there. They also improved Colonel Armstrong Redwoods up in Sonoma County. Here's the amphitheater up there, not made of stone, although the wall in the foreground is. And here's one of those structures that I told you was composting, but we don't have to worry about this anymore because this was in Big Basin and it just burned. And we're losing a lot of our CCC structures now in these mega fires. Unfortunately, we just lost that one. Then finally, the WPA, the most famous of the works agencies. Over 8.5 million Americans were given jobs in the about 8 years that the WPA had to run. It was run by Harry Hopkins over there on the left. And he was a brilliant administrator, as I said. The WPA did everything from building roads to sewing clothes for indigent families to conducting and composing symphonies. It laid streets. The one on the left is in San Francisco, and building retaining walls. The one over there is in Crockett, which is just filled with WPA stamps. This is in San Francisco. I love these sidewalk stamps, but they're rapidly disappearing. So I'm always happy when I find one. Most WPA projects are not marked. They're everywhere, but they're not marked. So they planted thousands of street trees in Berkeley and also in other cities such as Sacramento. And these are now, of course, 80 years old, but nobody knows that these were actually planted by the WPA. These are gutters and sidewalks in Petaluma. People forget that before the New Deal, many of our streets were dirt. We didn't have sidewalks. There were no gutters, etc. And the sewers were the local streams. The WPA and other work relief agencies corrected much of that. And all through Petaluma, you can see these. As soon as you see those basalt paving blocks being recycled, you pretty much know that the WPA was there. There are still websites that claim that the Golden Gate Bridge was WPA. No, it was locally financed, largely by the Bank of America through AP Giannini. But the approaches on both sides were WPA. The Doyle Drive on the south, which is now gone, of course, and Waldo Grade and the Sausalito lateral, and the lighting, too, were done by the WPA. They did a lot of work out on Angel Island. Here were improvements to Fort McDowell out on Angel Island. And then they built other amphitheaters. This one is at Tamalpais High School. It's the Mead Theater. And here's the WPA card, which tells you that, in fact, they were building a community theater at Tam High. This is a retaining wall out at the tip of Point Reyes. This is the old Coast Guard life-saving station. And thanks to my pal, Carola DeRoy, who was the historian for Point Reyes National Seashore. She's now retired back in New Hampshire. I learned that this is actually WPA, although I should have known. It has a kind of smell to it. And it turns out that, here's one of the WPA cards. It looks like the roads that feed the lighthouse and the life-saving station, the paved roads out on the point were probably WPA as well too. Because the WPA built thousands of miles of farm-to-market roads throughout the country, often in very rural areas, which enormously increased the productivity of farms as well as rural electrification, all of a gift of the New Deal, and of which most people now are absolutely ignorant. So next time you drive out into Point Reyes, thank the WPA. Also, look at bridge stanchions as you're driving by. Slow down and notice, for example, this one in Olema, over Olema Creek, that the date, 1937. This one in San Rafael, 1941, or this one over the Garcia River up on Highway 1. The WPA built much of Highway 1 and improved it along the coast. Then there's public education. This is the Berkeley High School with a sculpture on the side by Jacques Schneer. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. A quaint notion these days, but people believed it back then. And that's St. George slaying the dragon of ignorance on the side of the Berkeley High School. Well, we didn't get anything quite so grand in the North counties, but we did get a lot of schools. So this sort of Mayan marvel is the Park School in Mill Valley. This is the Parkside School in Sebastopol, which has a sculpture of the globe with the date on it, 1936. So you pretty much know that this is WPA. Annalee High School in Sebastopol is WPA. And they built entire college campuses. Santa Rosa Junior College is almost all built by the Public Works Administration, which I believe I'm about to come back to. And look at the quality of the architecture. They built colleges like Brooklyn College, which look like Ivy League schools. And these were largely for working class people to get the chance to have an education, which of course they had never had before on the upper levels as they did after the New Deal. Look at the quality of these buildings. There are plaques all over Santa Rosa JC. They used to buff them, actually, polish them, but we don't do that kind of thing anymore. So most people don't even notice that they're there. And it's still serving the purpose for which it was intended, of giving adults continuing education, in this case, art lessons. So speaking of public art, the WPA and the Treasury Department all had art programs to keep artists employed and to get new ones going. This is a beautiful landscape by Maurice Delmieux out at what was the San Geronimo School, but is now the community center out there. Sir Francis Drake headed out for the point. He did a number of these large murals through Marin. Thanks to my friend Ann Rosenthal, this is the mural that he did for Tamalpais High School, which has been rolled up. It's in bad shape. We're waiting for the money to restore this, but Ann tells me it's 40 feet long. So it looks like a beautiful piece of work, but she tells me it needs a great deal of work. So let's get to work raising the funds for that, like Ross did for the Three Bears Hut. Then there are the post offices. The New Deal built over 1,000 post offices around the country. They're often the best built and handsomest building in many small towns. And many of them have artworks through the Treasury section, not the WPA. And that includes Sonoma and Marin County. This is Sebastopol, which has a very nice landscape on the inside of the farms. And it's signed by the artist who did it, Mallet Dean, and who even also said that it's the Treasury Department art project, for which those artists were incredibly grateful. This is one in the San Rafael post office. Many of the murals in post offices dignify the delivery of mail and the honesty of the Postal Service. So this shows the mail delivery up the creek in San Rafael in the 19th century. And then this one is actually, I'm cheating a bit here. This is in St. Helena, but it's one of my favorites. And it shows the grape pickers out in the vineyards over in Napa Valley. This is the old post office in Mill Valley, which is no longer a functional post office. Many of the post offices have been sold or are being sold and have been privatized. And I don't know whether this one had an artwork on the inside. Yes, I mentioned the Public Works Administration under Harry Hopkins. This is one which is not well known, but it should be because they did the big projects, such as sewage treatment plants. They built bridges. That's Highway 1. This is a bridge into Alameda, still in work. The Bay Bridge and the Alameda public electrical system. Almost all of this is still in operation because they built so well at that time. They built really big projects like Shasta Dam, but they could also do smaller ones like the Mill Valley City Hall and Fire Station, or the Petaluma Fire Station. So here you begin to see that there's some confusion because this could very well be WPA, but in this case, and both the last cases, it's PWA. And that one actually has a very nice bronze plaque on the outside, which needs polishing up. This is Boy's Hot Spring over in the Sonoma Valley, and it's been radically altered or torn down. I don't know, it's not there anymore, anything like this, but that was a WPA project, as you can see from the sawhorse down there. Then they provided for the common defense. Again, this is a sculpture in Greenbelt, Maryland, but they did much military preparedness, especially towards the end of the 30s, as Roosevelt could begin to see that we were going to get into another world war, and the WPA and PWA segged into that so that winning the war would have not been nearly as easy as it was, if you can say it was easy, which it certainly wasn't, without what the New Deal agencies did as they amped up for the war. Hamilton Field is a beautiful PWA campus of military buildings with officers' housing and enormous hangars, etc. So thank the PWA when you go around Hamilton Field. We also got our airports from the New Deal. This is the Santa Rosa Airport, which has, of course, been vastly expanded. Many of them were just airstrips. The CCC did a lot of this in rural areas. But if you've ever flown into SFO, that's a WPA, PWA collaboration. They filled in the bay there, as they did Treasure Island, which was going to be our Trans-Pacific airport. But they haven't really learned what the kind of runways the jets need at that time, so it never became that. But this is the original administration building at SFO when it was called Mills Field. They didn't really know what an airport should look like, so it made it look kind of like an old Southern Pacific train station. But that one's completely gone. And then there's public health. This was very important to the New Dealers, so many of whom had worked in the settlement houses earlier in the 20th century. So they tackled public health in all of its dimensions. They laid sewers, for example, and built sewage treatment plants so that our water wasn't polluted. They built thousands of hospitals around the country. This is the county hospital for Sonoma County on Chanate Road, magnificent building. Here it is today, actually, and you can see the quality of detailing on this. They felt that aesthetics was a part of therapy and that these buildings should be beautiful. So here are these kinds of Moorish tiles on it. Unfortunately, it's been badly vandalized. The last I heard was that the city was going to redevelop this and tear the building down, which is really unfortunate. It's a beautiful building. These are just some of the hospitals built around the country, many of them rural hospitals and clinics. And these are the hospitals that have been closed, the rural hospitals. And not surprisingly, it's these counties, these rural counties, where the coronavirus is going wild because they no longer have the medical care that they need, that those rural hospitals and clinics actually would have served as a bulwark against. Right across Chanate Road on the other side is what was a tuberculosis sanitarium. It's called Oak Knoll, and now it serves people with mental illness. But all through that group of buildings, you can actually see retaining walls with the WPA markers. And again, once again, we have slashed our taxes so that now mental health services are facing deep cuts in Sonoma County. And that includes the Sonoma State Home at Eldridge, which has recently been closed. This was a beautiful 1,000-acre campus, which was meant to care for people with severe retardation and other problems. And that recently has been closed. If you go through the campus, you'll see beautiful, beautiful buildings like this. And notice right there, that is a marker that shows that it was part of the Federal Works Agency at that time, 1939. We treat our mentally ill people differently these days. It's become the purview of the law enforcement officers, or they're just left onto the streets. There was a great concern for children's welfare. The New Dealers understood that if children were hungry, they would be stunted for the rest of their lives. So not only were they fed, but they were given art and music lessons as well too. This is a bus shelter in Berkeley a few years ago. I was surprised to see that in America, 20% of children go to bed hungry. That was before the virus. It's much worse now, actually. They also felt that recreational facilities were essential for healthy people, and so they improved all of our parks. They created over 1,000 swimming pools around the country. Unfortunately, none of them in our counties. And here's one of the cards that says the Juilliard Park in Santa Rosa is a WPA facility, and there's Harvey Smith, one of our associates, standing on the bridge there, the flagpole, and the series of ponds which were built by the WPA. Unfortunately, most of these are very vague. They don't really tell you very much, but it turns out that most of our parks were improved at that time, such as McNear Park in Petaluma. Whenever you see a drinking fountain like this, you knew the WPA was there, off in the tennis courts. This is a public golf course in San Francisco at the Lincoln Golf Course, 1939. And this is a golf course in Healdsburg, which was also WPA as well. This was an article in the Chronicle which bemoaned the fact that we can't maintain our parks anymore because we can't afford to. This man he tries to take care of the park at Crocker Amazon in San Francisco, not knowing that in fact that park was largely created by the WPA, including these bleachers. It put hundreds of men to work at that time who would have not had work otherwise. And finally, there are national parks. The last I saw, they were $14 billion in deferred maintenance. So all of the national parks, state parks, et cetera, the state forests, or national forests are all in very, very bad shape, as I said earlier, because we can't afford to maintain them anymore. As I travel around the country, I think of these 18th century landscapes that you see when you go to museums. I think of our country as actually in a great state of ruin now. It's not just the infrastructure that's in a state of ruin. It's actually the cities themselves and the people who are in a state of ruin. This is a terrible wasted resource that we see all the time in our cities and out in the country now, and it's spreading wildly. And yet we do nothing about it, but we could learn from what was done 80 years ago. I travel around the country on what we so laughably call our national rail system. And this was North Philadelphia. I shot this from the window. And I was thinking that that factory in the back would have once employed many of the men who you see in the jail in the foreground. This is a problem that we could address if we actually wanted to. But it's no wonder that so many of the people in areas like this are so angry now. Well, this is the New Deal matrix. I've been showing you all these physical things, but the point that I wanted to make is that it is an invisible matrix, and it's not just the physical things, it's a lost ethical language. They tackled things in a holistic manner that we don't do anymore. But we have a lot to learn from those public works. These, again, are some of the WPA posters. And I gave the project the name The Living New Deal because it's not dead. It's still around us. We still use it all the time. And what you can learn from posters like this is that you can see the word over and over again on these posters that these services are free to you, such as education, for example. That's very different if you remove the R and it becomes fee. That determines the kind of world that you're going to live in, whether it will be free or fee. So I wonder as I do this project, as we all do this project, because it's a team effort, was all of this forgotten or was it actually erased? Well, you can find out actually, or think for yourself, by visiting us at the Living New Deal website. There you go. And we always welcome contributions. You can just go to the donate button and you can do that to keep us working at discovering this great lost civilization, which is our own. Thank you very much. Joe?
Yes, great. That was wonderful.
Well, thank you.
I think
Thank you so much.
I speak for everybody who's participating. I'm seeing a lot of people saying wonderful presentation. Thank you. And now is a good time for questions. If anybody has any questions, post them please on the.
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
And Gray, I think you can see this too on the chat. You can see all the accolades coming in. I know I learned a lot about this, what was going on in the New Deal.
Well, I'm always learning, but Joe, I can't see the chat.
I believe if you hit the, do you see at the bottom of your screen chat?
Well, I see Q&A.
Q&A, click on that. And a screen should pop up.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, I see a few friends here. But I think there's more. I only see two. Hi, Glory. Hi, Lauren.
And let me see here. Let me go through the chat here. We have a lot of. Let me go through these and see what people are saying here. Let's see. Oops. Yeah, there you go. Let's see. Peter Tannen is asking, is the Women and the New Deal program that you mentioned earlier, is that recorded and available for viewing?
I think some of that is, and we also produced a booklet too at the same time. You can actually write to us and we can send you that. It's a really impressive document because there were so many women who were important to the New Deal. It's really an impressive accomplishment.
Let's see, Barbara Sweet said that many people documented on paper all the buildings here in Hyde Park, New York. Yes, where there's some projects in Hyde Park.
Oh, Hyde Park is filled with stuff because, of course, that was Roosevelt's home. Dutchess County was. And so it's just filled all the way up the Hudson River. The CCC actually was very active in the Hudson River Valley. And there are buildings, there are beautiful schools, some of which Roosevelt himself had a hand in designing, as well as I think it's 5 post offices in and around Hyde Park, all of which have artworks in them. I mean, he loved that area. And so, of course, it got a lot of stuff. But but we're always digging up more stuff. I was just out there last summer, actually, looking at some of the beautiful things. I actually got to visit Eleanor Roosevelt's childhood home on the Hudson River, which is a real thrill.
Okay, let's see. William McCoy asks, how did a project get planned and selected?
Oh, you know, that's a very good question because when I got involved in this, I thought that I'd find all of that information back in Washington because I thought, of course, it was very centralized. It wasn't actually. The projects would generally be initiated by government agencies, public agencies, and they would submit plans for projects that they wanted done to the WPA or the PWA or the CCC, and then it would be okayed in Washington, and they would turn the design of it over to local architects. So there is no New Deal style. It's very incredibly varied. So it was actually quite decentralized. And the city in particular that got an awful lot was, of course, New York City, because Robert Moses, whatever else you may think about him and what he became after the war, he was a brilliant administrator himself, and he had scads of projects just ready to go. They were shovel ready, and the WPA and the PWA came in and absolutely transformed all 5 boroughs of New York City, which you can see on our map, which we did a few years ago, the extent to which it was transformed. But as I said, so was Washington, D.C. Whether the Republicans like it or not, they're living in FDR's town. It's everywhere there.
I see. Now, Kurt is asking, are there any researchers besides you in Marin and Sonoma documenting the New Deal legacy buildings and infrastructure?
That's a great question, Kurt. I don't know. I don't know of any, but we, of course, are always happy to enlist people. And you can just go to the website. And if you know of anything, let us know. Because, for example, you might be taking a walk and you might look down at your feet and you'll see a WPA stamp. Let us know. We'll put it on the map. There was a, I think it was a master's thesis done at Santa Rosa Community College decades ago by Pauline Goddard. And we rely on that for WPA work that was done in Sonoma County. And Gay LeBaron at the Press Democrat has used that quite a bit and written articles about it.
Peter Tannen asks, or I think this is more of a comment, but he says that when you were talking about SFO, that the museum that's at SFO is a replica of the interior of the original terminal.
Good point. Peter's one of the few people who would know that. But yeah, you can go off to the right of the airport. They have an excellent museum there that most people don't have the time to visit, but they've actually recreated the lobby of the old administration building that I showed you, which, as I said, looks like an old SP station. And they've got a wonderful archives too.
Well, let's see, there are a lot of people thanking you for your presentation here. Let me see if there are any other questions. Laura asks, well, she says, thank you. And she'd be interested in how the bas reliefs and murals were being received then and now.
Oh, she probably means the ones at Greenbelt.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, they were very well received at that time. Greenbelt was a very interesting experiment. The New Deal built over 100 new towns around the country to varying degrees. The 3 most ambitious were Greenbelt, Greendale, and Green Hills in the Midwest. But Greenbelt, right outside of Washington, is the most ambitious. And it's still, the New Deal is still going strong there. It is an entirely New Deal built city, and there are artworks all over the place, but mostly they were done by this woman, Leonora Thomas, and the series of murals reminding you when you went to the recreation center of the preamble to the Constitution and our obligations as well as our privileges as members of a democracy, as citizens. We should have more of those. And they're very well done. I'd like to actually see reproductions of that in other places in the country because, of course, civics isn't much taught these days. So there you have a visual tutorial of the Constitution right as you go to one of these WPA buildings.
The murals were beautiful. There was one in San Francisco that came under controversy.
Oh, there are many more than that.
So.
Yeah, the New Deal art is generally broken down into 2 categories. One is American scene. That's the kind of landscapes, people working. That generally doesn't upset anybody. But then there's social realism, which is what you saw in Coit Tower or in the Rincon Annex Post Office or the George Washington High School in San Francisco, which is very controversial now. And that has either implicit or explicit critiques of various things such as capitalism, for example, or American history. And those have always been in trouble, and they're in trouble right now, such as those murals at George Washington High School.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The
And unfortunately, because they show historical truth, that the United States was built on slavery and a genocide of the Indians. But some people today find that very uncomfortable, even though it is a historical reality.
Absolutely. Let's see. Gloria is asking if you could talk a little bit about Arthurdale.
Arthurdale. Oh, yeah. Arthurdale, I've never visited, unfortunately, but it was a new town built for coal miners in West Virginia. It was basically, people were given small houses and allotments so that they could raise their own food and become self-sufficient, and encouraged to do handicrafts, have co-ops, etc. And it was a special favorite of Eleanor Roosevelt. She would often visit it, and there are wonderful movies of her actually dancing in a cotton gingham dress with some of the miners at that time. There's actually an Arcadia book about Arthurdale.
Let's see. Okay. And Lauren is asking about, she said she'd like to see a New Deal museum.
We would too.
Are you aware of one, or is there one in the works? How would that happen?
Well, no, that's it's amazing that when you consider all that I've just showed you, and that's just scratching the surface. When you go around the country, I mean, we know that there are hundreds of thousands, possibly millions more sites to go, and there is no museum to what the New Deal did and what it left us. And I think that's one of the reasons that the memory of it has not been forgotten, but it's been erased. I often think that that is not accidental. And we hope eventually to be able to raise the money to build the first museum and study center of the New Deal, where people can learn more about this extraordinary period of our history that so few people know anything about. You know, I mean, young people today, of course, talk about a Green New Deal. They have almost no knowledge of how green the original New Deal was. I give talks on that as well, too. I gave one at the Exploratorium. And we have a great deal to learn from what they did at that time. And not all of it was positive. For example, the CCC introduced kudzu vine to control soil erosion in the South, and it's just taken over everything. It's like triffids or something. But and then I showed you the revetments in the streams, which are now being taken out. And of course, many of the dams that seemed so good at that time for providing water and hydroelectric energy, we now are thinking differently about them, and some of them are coming down now.
Glory June mentions that there's a CCC museum in Michigan.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then there's a mini museum at Pokagon State Park in Indiana.
That's right. I visited Pokagon with Glory June. She is the historian of the New Deal par excellence in Indiana, and I had a chance to meet her several years ago when I gave a talk in Kokomo.
Okay. Let me just go through these. Barbara Sweet mentions that the U.S. Postal Service is planning to remove several paintings, I guess, in many of the post offices because of the people in the paintings, what we were talking about earlier.
That's right. That's very unfortunate. One of our associates, Evan Kalish in New York, has been really tailing this through Freedom of Information Acts. We know of, I think, 16 murals now that have or are going to be covered because they show things which people today find uncomfortable, and usually slavery and the treatment of the Indians. Unfortunately, one of them is a magnificent series of murals by Roosevelt's cousin, Olin Dowes, in the Rhinebeck post office in the Hudson Valley, which made the mistake of showing that there was slavery in the Hudson Valley. I didn't know that until I saw it. which means then that many of the legendary fortunes and estates of the Hudson Valley were built on that. But there are some people who want that removed, and plans are to cover all of those murals, which are such an integral part of that beautiful post office, which was designed by Roosevelt.
Let's see, Kurt Fechtmeyer, I think I pronounced that right, says that he knows that on the Living New Deal website, there's individuals who contributed personal stories about their relatives or friends. Are you still welcoming personal New Deal stories for your website?
Absolutely, yes, we welcome accounts, especially of the CCC, but I think Dan Barth is on this call, and Dan was one of the first people whom we talked to in the project, who talked about tuberculosis hospital up in Butte County, I believe it was, that his grandfather was not able to go to because they lived in the next county. And because of that, Dan's entire family was infected with TB, and the whole subsequent family history was affected by that. So that's one of my favorite anecdotes. So we welcome stories like that from people.
Great, fantastic. Let's see, the Hirimo Ono says, is it possible to run a New Deal in the current generation? I think that's what he's saying. You think there could be a new deal in today's environment or something like it?
Well, I'd certainly like to see one. I mean, especially because of our rotting infrastructure. We are no longer a first world nation. If you travel around the country and see what's happening to our infrastructure, it's just falling apart. And much of it was built 80 years ago and hasn't been maintained. So that's the first thing you could do. That would put millions of people to work actually rebuilding so that we could regain our status as a first world status country. And then there's the Green New Deal. And of course, that is something that I'm very concerned as an environmentalist with, that we need a new CCC, vastly expanded, and it needs to be international to begin planting trees and conserving soil, et cetera, to begin mitigating the kind of climate change that we're already seeing. And of course, fighting the fires, mitigating the fires by creating fuel breaks and cleaning out our forests. These are things that just have to be done. As I said, I would like to see a vastly expanded California Conservation Corps, which would be very expensive, but a lot cheaper than what we're losing today in property and lives in these enormous fires.
Let me see, we're a little past 12 o'clock, but looks like most of our attendees are sticking with us, but let's just take a couple more questions.
Sure.
There's Cynthia mentions that there's a major exhibit on the New Deal at the FDR Presidential Library in Hyde Park.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia. Yes, that is one of the places you can go to. It's not exclusively a New Deal museum, but the library there, which is on the Roosevelt property, does have an excellent exhibition, which includes a lot of stuff on the New Deal, as well as there's a research library there. If it's Cynthia I'm thinking of, she was the head librarian there. And so thank you for reminding me. But I always regard Hyde Park as kind of Mecca. I always feel almost like I've gone home when I go to Hyde Park and visit Roosevelt's family home, which he gave to the nation, by the way, as well as a great deal of land around it. Oh, and you can also visit just up the valley, up the hill, about 2 miles away is Valkill, which is Eleanor Roosevelt's house, which she lived in and had a kind of arts and crafts co-op there. And then further up the hill is Top Cottage, which is the Dutch revival house that Roosevelt designed for himself for use after he retired, which he of course never got to do.
Yeah. All right. I think we covered most of the questions. I apologize if I missed anybody's questions. There's I think Peter gives us a website on the chat many museums and exhibits commemorating the work of the CCC at ccclegacy.org.
Wonderful. Thanks, Peter.
A good website for people who want to learn more about what we've been talking about today. And Kurt mentions the Francis Perkins Center.
Yes. Yes, that's off in Maine, Francis Perkins' own home on the coast of Maine. And that's excellent as well, too.
I know that, like you said, we've only scratched the surface of the enormous impact that the New Deal had on the Bay Area, California, the nation. And I want to personally thank you, Doctor, for sharing your insights with us today. I don't know. Richard, do you have any final words?
I just say, Gray, it was a wonderful program, and I appreciate the interest that the viewers had, and particularly all the effort that you put into making the show. I appreciate the efforts of your research, and thank you for sharing it with us today.
I'm happy to do so. Thank you, Richard and Joe. And this is my FDR bobblehead, and so he thanks you as well, too.
All right. Thank you very much, Gray.
And I just want to thank everybody who attended. We had a great turnout today. That's wonderful. I apologize for any little glitches along the way, but
We're still learning.
we are still learning all the time. And I want to point out that we are recording this and that it will be available on our Ross Historical Society Moya website within a couple days. So you can watch this again for free, obviously.
Right, and we will be preparing a schedule for next year, and that will be posted on the website as well, and hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.